Good afternoon, world history students. Okay, let's get started right away. Trying to make sure I get everything in. I think this will be a short video today, but we are going to cover the last section, section 3 of chapter 21. As you see from this slide here, it is the era of disillusionment, and we're going to talk about why that is the case, although we've really looked at the whys, and now we're just going to see how it works out in real life. The whys are what's going on in society. We finished World War I and we've gone into the Great Depression, and life just stinks, apparently, according to so many people. And without allowing themselves to see the goodness of God, they drift into disillusionment. They think that everything was supposed to be perfect and now suddenly it's not, and they wonder why. So we're going to look at it in 3 different art forms. First, in the visual arts, in painting. We're going to see 2 different schools of painting in the early 20th century. The first is Expressionism. And this basically, in an Expressionism painting, the artist is not depicting something accurately. It's not meant to be an exact replication of what he saw. It's meant to show how he feels about a subject. Henri Matisse is the foremost painter of Expressionism paintings. What is most important in Expressionism is the colors, not the painting itself, but the colors of the painting, because they show how the artist feels. And you'll notice in this painting here, there's very distinct colors. There's not a whole lot of graphic detail to the painting itself. It's mostly about the colors in it. The second type is Cubism, and Cubism was made popular by Pablo Picasso. Cubism is all about cubes, or geometric shapes, to be more specific. Any geometric shape. It doesn't have to be a cube, but it is the use of geometric shapes to show whatever you're depicting. Picasso believed that what we see might not be a final reality. That's bizarre, but that's what he thought. So he wanted to depict it different than he actually saw it. So he used Cubism, this use of geometric shapes, which produces, of course, distorted figures. Architecture. We've got new building products, new building materials that are going to lead to new types of building. Predominantly concrete, glass, and steel. And because of these, concrete, glass, and steel, we're going to get all types of new buildings. That included 3 architects that we need to look at. The first is Louis Sullivan. Excuse me. High pollen count today is driving me crazy. All right, so Louis Sullivan is the inventor, if you will, of the skyscraper. He is the one credited with designing the first skyscrapers. Walter Gropius did that in Europe. Louis Sullivan did it here in America, designed the first skyscrapers, became the leader in that division, that design element, and Walter Gropius did that in Europe. Both of these men believed that form preceded function. In architecture, basically that means, what are you using the building for? Form follows function. So whatever the function of the building is needs to take preeminence in designing it, and form will follow. Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the most famous of the American architects ever, and he thought that the design of a building should blend in with its surroundings, like this one here in this picture. So that was what he did, and this actually is called Falling Water. It's one of his most famous buildings ever designed, and if you find a building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, it's definitely worth seeing. It will be different than anything you've ever seen before. All right, so let's talk about music, and I want to play some music for you. We've got in this time period 2 predominant musicians who are going to really change the way music is handled in this time. The first is Igor Stravinsky. His most famous work was called The Rite of Spring, and he was famous for polytonality. Polytonality means that we're not following one simple melody all the way through a piece of music, that there's no fixed tone patterns, there's no fixed melodies. It's all very unusual, and I'm going to play a piece for you right here. Just a little piece. Okay, so you can see how the melody is kind of a little bit all over the place. That is Igor Stravinsky. That is a YouTube video, so you could go to YouTube and put in The Rite of Spring, and it'll come up for you. It's really very interesting. The second musician we need to talk about is Arnold Schoenberg. Schoenberg is a German. He was very unusual. He produced what he called atonal music. And atonal music means he completely got rid of all fixed tone patterns and made it without tone, atonal, without tone. This is an example of his. Again, very unusual, very different than anything we had heard before. Okay, so let's talk about some of the common characteristics of this. And I did not put these on the slide, but they're in your textbook on pages 487 and 88. The first one is the unusual intervals, the jumping from one note to another. Those are pretty standard throughout music, as in you can't go from this note to this note without something in between. But in music in the early 19th century, 20th century, they abandoned those principles and did unusual intervals. They also had their musical phrases were non-symmetrical, meaning that you might have so many beats in one measure, but the next measure would not have the same number of beats or not be symmetrical. Odd and very complex meters was another one, and jarring and violent rhythms. And they would also put things together, widely divergent musical styles like jazz mixed with rock music, or classics mixed with jazz. Just different things that didn't necessarily go together. Mix the two pieces and see what you come up with. The last thing we need to look at, the last art form, is literature. So we've looked at architecture, the visual arts and architecture, and music, and the last one is literature. We're going to look at a couple different artists in writers in this era, but I want you to think first about what is going on in society. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, what is going on is we've come through World War I, where we thought the entire world was going to just cease to be. And we went into the growth of dictators, into the Great Depression. So life is hard for people in general at this time in history. And they don't like anything that much right now. And that's going to show in their writing. T.S. Eliot was one of the most famous writers of this time. His major work was called The Waste Land. And this is basically the wasteland. He's talking about somebody's life, and he's showing that his life is desolate and empty and useless. The Hollow Men is another work with the same kind of outlook. In the end of this book, he says, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. And I wish we were in class and we could have a discussion about this, but since we can't, I want you to think about that. And what does that mean? And what would that look like in society? Okay? Thomas Mann is another author of this era. He depicted his characters, Thomas Mann did, as victims of uncontrollable forces that surrounded them. Just, and who wants to read a book about a victim? That somebody who is constantly being harassed by others or hurt by others. It was a hopeless, pessimistic pacifism outlook. Pacifism is, I can't control it. Pessimism, always seeing the worst in people. Hopelessness. This is not a place that I would want to live. Okay, so, but that is what men like T.S. Eliot and Thomas Mann depicted in their work. And the last one is James Joyce, who is pretty high on my list of people to avoid reading their literature. He depicted a world that was hopeless, barren, and dehumanizing. Whoops, sorry. His favorite way to write was called Stream of Consciousness. And in Stream of Consciousness, what the author predominantly does is he takes the main character, whoever he's using at that point, and he tells you what he's thinking at that moment. So it may or may not have anything to do with the rest of the story. His stories are extremely hard to read, very depressing and dehumanizing in a way. Okay, and that finishes chapter 21. We are done. So we will meet via, we met last week via Zoom. We will have a test come up on Wednesday. It will open on Wednesday for you to do on Wednesday or Thursday. Tomorrow we'll have a review, so I will post a Quizlet and possibly a Kahoot as well. We'll see how much I get done. And you can work from there on your own. If you have any questions, though, please let me know. I'll be happy to help you. Okay, that's it for today. If you have any questions, please let me know.